just spent some time today wandering around supply and demand curves. Just I want to get you as comfortable as I can with them before we start moving on to other stuff. There are miscellaneous details I need to throw in periodically because I forgot to throw them in last time. The first thing that you're going to see this when you go into chapter 7, incidentally. That's the next chapter you should read. So skip 6 and 5. Skip 6 and go to 7 and come back to 6. Demand curves are additive. So we're doing analysis. We put up a demand curve that looks like this. And for our purposes, it works just fine, but we need to understand that if we double the size of the market, or we just had, here's the demand curve for Idaho, and here's the demand curve for Washington. For whatever good this happens to be. So the demand curve for Washington and Idaho is going to be linearly additive. So you're simply going to take whatever this quantity is for that particular amount in Idaho at this particular price, and you add it on to Washington, and that's the demand curve for both Idaho plus Washington. So you're adding horizontally. And you can do that. We can have demand curves for individuals. And again, at each particular price, all we're doing is adding horizontally in each of these instances. So we're going to see situations where markets get expanded, or they get contracted, or you open trade, or something unusual happens when the market segment disappears. The demand curve will change radically and change the market structure radically. So you need to know that these things look like they're shifting, but they're not shifting in the sense that we're looking at one of these factors up there for demand. They're shifting simply because of the size of the markets shifting. So we could add on here size of the market. So now we'll have a demand curve that looks like that. Because we've increased the size, we've added Idaho and Washington. So I don't need to do all this other that. So, just going back to what we were doing on Friday. So we've come up with some idea called demand. Demand's the relationship between quantity and price for a particular good in a particular market. So we can establish that there's some demand curve sitting out there. And the demand curve we know is what? The only thing we know about demand curves is what? They're downward sloping. That's the only thing we know about. There's an inverse relationship between price and quantity. Otherwise, they can have all sorts of shapes. They're determined by how big the market is, what the complements are, what the substitutes are, what's happening in other markets. But in any case, we're in a situation where we can say hypothetically we have downward sloping demand curves here, which quantity per unit of time, and dollars. And we also, in the relationship here, that we described here, which is the inverse relationship between price and quantity, simply refers to the downward sloping nature of the demand curve. And then we can go ahead and start saying what happens if the price of a substitute rises. If the price of a substitute rises, so a good example now is, here's the demand curve do this in the opposite direction. $1 natural gas. Let's say that's the U.S. demand curve for natural gas. And I'm assuming that natural gas, well, it's a good assumption. Natural gas and heating oil are what to each other? They're substitutes. So if the price of oil, anybody know what the price of oil went to per barrel today? So Brent oil is now under $50, and somewhere Brent crude hit 42 bucks. So Texas is suffering, along with the Middle East and everybody else. But the price of oil has been falling. It's fallen from $113 last May. It's down to the actual future price is $47. And you say, well, that's oil. That's barrels of oil coming out of Brent oil is actually North Sea oil, but it's comparable to Texas oil and other oils. What's happening in the natural gas market? Pardon me? What's happened to the price of the substitute? It's gone down, right? So the price of natural gas is also going to do that. It's going to come down. So the price of natural gas, the demand for natural gas is shifting in. And it's shifting in because this demand curve is dependent on a price of oil of 113, and this demand curve is dependent on the price of oil at $47. So the demand, people are substituting away from natural gas, so the demand's shifting down and moving down the demand curve for oil. This is the market for oil. And in the oil market, we're simply postulating that, oh, people are demanding more oil as the price goes from 113 to 47. So in the oil market, we're moving down this demand curve. In the natural gas market, we've actually seen a shift because the price of substitutes changed. So the way I designate these things is this is the change in this variable, and this is the direction of the shift. So, referring to your answer, if this is negative, this just means it goes in the same direction. That would be negative. So you have substitutes out there. There are lots of things that, I mean, just about every good you can think of has some sort of substitutes associated with it. And this sort of price-quantity relationship will hold for them. There are also all sorts of goods that are complements. So, what is give me some examples of things, services, goods that are complements to oil. What do you think is going to happen to driving vacations this summer? We're going to go up or down? What's going to happen to the price of traveling by car? It's going to go way down, right? So the demand for traveling vacations is going to go up. So if you're looking at what could we be looking at? We could be looking at automobiles in general. Demand's going to go up as the demand for, as price of oil goes down, the demand for cars is going to go up. This is at 137, this is at 42, because it's now cheaper to drive. So the demand curve is simply going to shift out. And in fact, I see this sort of thing. So 92.5% of you watched football in one form or another this weekend, even if it was casual. And you may have seen a commercial for Dodge trucks. It's Dodge trucks and Ford trucks, I can't remember which. And the commercial is focused entirely on miles per gallon. It's the commercial where they go, we're not showing you guys pulling boats, we're not showing you industry people piling it up. They just show the truck going across some godforsaken place in eastern Washington with not a tree on it and saying, this truck will drive forever. And what we've seen is, interestingly enough, and I mentioned this on Friday, is if you look at automobile prices at the end of the year, particularly truck prices, you'll find, and truck sales, you'll see this big increase in American truck sales from October, November, December. And what's driving that? Well, all of a sudden these trucks don't look so bad. You know, they used to look terrible because they guzzle gasoline, but now we're not so worried about, you know, the guzzling part of the prospect. So the demand for those trucks has gone up. And simply because gasoline and oil are complements with that truck to actually driving somewhere. You weren't even figments of your parents' imagination when this occurred, but in the early 1970s, when we had our first oil embargo, the price of gasoline went literally from 14 cents a gallon to $1.20 in a matter of 6 months or so. All of a sudden, everybody panicked over the efficiency of American cars. So you think a car is inefficient. So when you look at my Suburban, you go, he's driving a gas guzzler. Well, my Suburban gets 17 or 18 miles to the gallon. A Suburban in 1973 probably got 4 miles to the gallon. But it costs 14 cents a gallon to drive the darn thing. But what did happen is that as the price of gasoline went sky high, Americans were in this position that all these cars that we drive are gas guzzlers. I mean, they literally all were. I mean, you couldn't find, there were no cars that got 20 miles to the gallon at all. Driving it, you know, maybe a Porsche C, but that was about it, and only because it was dangerous. So what happened to the American automobile industry? It kept going on. The American automobile industry didn't adjust to that change in the price of the complement. It kept producing these big cars for quite a few years. And what entered the marketplace right away? Japanese automobiles. All of a sudden there was this huge increase in Japanese automobiles being imported, to the point that, as we'll get to it later on, American manufacturers are saying, oh, we got to put tariffs on these, they're killing our business. So everybody thinks, and everybody thought at the time, that, oh, the Japanese are geniuses. You know, as soon as the price of oil goes up and the price of gasoline goes to $1.50, which would be the equivalent of $5 today, the Japanese start producing these wonderful cars that everybody wants to buy. And in fact, VW bugs in Japanese, especially Toyotas and Nissans, their sales just went sky high. But it wasn't actually because they were geniuses. Has anybody ever driven on the streets in Tokyo? The streets are about that wide. And the only cars they had were cars that fit down those streets, and they happened to get great gas mileage. So what we were importing were automobiles that only fit down streets that were 9 feet wide. But it worked. It was changed the American market in a large way, simply because of this price of gasoline phenomenon. So that's a complement situation. So what's next on there? So then we have incomes that we've touched upon. Gasoline is probably a normal good. What's the difference between a normal good and an inferior good? Anybody? Nobody. Yeah.
Demand for normal goods go up as income goes up, and demand for inferior goods go up as income goes down.
Actually, it's the demand for inferior goods do not go up as income goes up. So there's that sort of relationship here. So income is, we normally think of goods as normal goods. There are inferior goods out there. Some goods are more normal than other goods. So what you see is, if you start looking at, this is a terrific article, we should dig up. The demand for dental care in the United States. So when we do demand studies, we'll do a study and we'll have demand for dental care, and we'll have, there's some constant, and then there's some demand. We'll look at the price of other health care and the price of movies, which may be substitutes, whatever we think of as substitutes and complements, and they may have some technology in there. And when we put income in the demand equation, the demand for dental care is incredibly driven by income. And then you go ahead and say, okay, that's dental care in general. What if you put, instead of just dental care, 3/4 of the people have had this. What if you put in orthodontia? So teeth straightening instead of just standard dental care. Again, it's so correlated with incomes that if you look at demand for general dental care among the poor population, it looks like that. If you look at demand for dental care under upper middle class populations, it's 10 times more. And if you do the same with orthodontia, you find the same thing. And interestingly enough, there are cultural differences depending on how long people have been in this country and what they're used to in terms of dental care and things like that. Very income related. So that's the income side. What's happening to McDonald's these days? I mean, there are those of us that are quarter pounder with cheese addicts, so we're not going away. But does anybody know what's happening? See any new, well, actually, you see any commercials lately for McDonald's? So McDonald's actually had commercials on the big football games yesterday and Saturday. And the reason they're having commercials is because they're being hit by other chains and other places where that are providing food, fast food of one sort or another, that at least in theory is the same price and providing healthier food. So people look at McDonald's as being very unhealthy. So, and their revenues have actually dropped year over year over year for about 5 years. They're really suffering. And they just, you know, they've done a bad job of it. What did Jack in the Box do? Jack in the Box does just the opposite. It says, we don't care about whether it's healthy or not or anything. If you got the munchies at 11 o'clock at night, you go to Jack in the Box and you can get 2 piles of this stuff for $5. So they're taking the bull by the horns and just going in the opposite direction. But again, their prices are substitutes and complements there. And McDonald's, by and large, is not a place where your income goes up drastically and you start buying a lot more McDonald's. You start buying other food instead. But McDonald's has been hit by not only the price of substitutes is changing, people are getting healthier foods in a cheaper way, but there's also this taste component that's affecting the demand for McDonald's hamburgers, and ultimately may cause them to totally switch the way they operate. And Jack in the Box is the same way. And they've done the same sort of thing. It would be really curious. We'll have to test this somehow. I don't know how to test it. So we need to find out if the Jack in the Box commercials in Washington State and Colorado are different than the commercials for Jack in the Box in Florida and Texas. That'll tell us about their marketing strategy. So go to the 2 states where we have legal pot and see if they're actually marketing directly to that particular option. I think they are. But it'd be interesting to see if they've manipulated enough where they don't even think of those commercials in Texas and Florida, and they do it in another way, when they hit states here. I haven't seen any other marketing in Washington State that is related at all to the legalization of marijuana. But I'm sure we will at some point. Do they can't advertise, do they advertise marijuana on television or the radio? Is there any of that? I haven't seen any of that. I haven't seen them in the newspapers either. But it's undoubtedly going to occur. Huge market. I mean, I know 2 angel-type investors who are, one of them is about the 12th person at Microsoft and has an unbelievable amount of money. I bet he has 80% of his assets now in Colorado and Washington pot production. Because he's looking at it as a, it's the next best thing in terms of investment. Some of us are a little more suspicious, or our Catholic upbringing doesn't let us do it. One of the others have. Okay, what else do we have in here? So one of the things that was in the newspaper, actually I think it was on CNN this morning, is that demand for, all of a sudden, what we're observing in the marketplace, we don't even have a supply curve up here. So wait for that part of it. So what we're observing in Europe is that prices of gasoline have fallen substantially as they have here. And a lot of people don't drive as much, and they're starting to think that people are simply waiting even a week to fill their gas tanks up. They have price expectations that prices are going to fall. They don't live in Madison Park, obviously, but there's that expectation sitting out there. And certainly, the airlines who stockpile gasoline or buy gasoline futures have been holding off and they hedge. And the gasoline, the airlines use very sophisticated fuel models, because that's where all their expenses. And they make it either because they have good fuel prices or bad fuel prices. But these changes in fuel prices that we're experiencing, the changes in oil, have caused the airlines to change the way they're storing oil and the amount of oil they're storing. And do you wait? Even as much as 3 or 4 months ago, people were predicting, well, oil prices are going to stop falling at $80. And now we're under 50. So that's going to affect output in that industry. It's going to affect profitability. It's going to affect whether you get a cheap airline seat. All sorts of things have to do with what's happening to that price of oil in the marketplace. And what else? Okay, and then we'll just go to the supply, we'll jump to the supply curve side here. So supply curve's basically the opposite. It's upward sloping, so positive relationship between dollars and quantity supplied. So we have an upward sloping supply curve. And of course, what determines, so we haven't gone into the detail of this yet. We have about a few more days before we do. But these supply curves are determined by A, the technology that's available in the world. So that's one of the factors. And B, the cost of production. So what are the price of inputs? So what we're seeing in the world right now, we're seeing 2 things. So we've got supply curves for trying to think of something innocuous here. It's not coming too fast. Let's just say the supply curve of providing heating services in New York City. So in New York City and in Seattle, believe it or not, there are steam companies. You guys know this? There's still a company downtown that's 100 years old called Seattle Steam. And it has boilers, and it has natural gas boilers and oil boilers, and it hooks them up, and it's got all these buildings all over Seattle that's hooked up to their steam pipes, and that's how they heat them. So what's happening to their supply curves right now? Well, their supply curves are shifting out because their cost of inputs of producing that heat, that steam, has been dropping. So they have supply curves that are shifting out. And all we're talking about here is price of a single input here. What happens if there's a change in technology? Same sort of thing occurs. Supply curves shift out with changes in technology. We're assuming changes in technology are basically changes that lower costs. That by definition is what a change in technology is. It's something that changes the cost of producing a good through something other than the input price. It uses input prices efficiently. So here's sort of a distant one on regulation. Does anybody know what the Keystone Pipeline is? Nobody's from the Midwest. So one of the desires of the oil companies is to pump oil from the high plains, including Canada and North Dakota, down into actually to the Midwest where there already are pipelines. And the Keystone Pipeline is basically being held up in Congress, and you have a regulatory environment that's holding up with the pipelines. What do you think is going to happen to the price of oil and gas? Or excuse me, what's going to happen to the supply of oil and gas if they pass the Keystone Pipeline bill that allows it to be built? You think that what's going to happen is the supply curve is going to shift out. The pipeline is going to lower the cost of producing that energy. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, we're not judging here, we're just looking at what's going to happen in terms of the supply in the marketplace. And it'll also be an interesting fight that you'll see in the next 3 weeks, because the Senate I think the House has already passed a Keystone bill, and it's gone to the Senate. And the question is whether the Senate will pass it. And if the Senate passes it, then Obama has to decide whether he's going to veto it or not. So it'll be interesting to watch. But it's a regulatory change that affects how the supply of oil in the United States will be affected. And then, of course, the other thing that we had out here that affected supply curves and supplies of goods and services is the price of other goods, which is basically what can this producer produce with the same technology or the same capital that he's producing with the capital he's producing with this system. And if that goes up, we switch production. We move away from production of corn and into the production of soybeans. If soybeans all of a sudden become more profitable. So you have those sorts of shifts going on. So you can see in a marketplace, So there's our oil market as of May. This is basically the world oil market, because these oil products that we're looking at are shipped all over the world. There's pretty much free trade in all of them. There's some stifling of trade among certain countries, but it's not much. But we have some sort of equilibrium going on. And just for kicks, let's stick it up. There's natural gas at the same time. So, if you started reading the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times a year ago in the spring, you would have, and you just were keying in on articles about oil and gasoline, you would find that oil production in the United States was climbing rapidly. And in fact, it's gone up about 40% in about a year and a half. So we've had this huge increase in oil production. And by last June, May or June, we actually became the largest producer of oil in the world, which people didn't realize. But what we had going on was we had a change in technology. And the change in technology, which is the second supply curve here, is fracking. It's, for those of you that are not familiar with it, it's drilling a hole in the ground and then pumping a whole bunch of water and chemicals down there, and it forces the oil up. Very simple technology, and pretty cheap to put into production. So what happens? So this is the part, this is what I want to make sure you're thinking about when you're seeing these shifts or changes in marketplaces. So what happens in May is, and this is all dynamic, of course, so there's been a big shift in the supply curve. And that particular price, $113 a barrel, you've got demanders out there, and demanders are going, well, we're not going to pick up this extra amount. There's a surplus. Here's the quantity being supplied at that price, and here's the quantity being demanded at that price. So we're starting off with a situation where we have an equilibrium, and then all of a sudden something's occurred in the marketplace, which is what we're describing as a change in technology. In this particular situation, the change in technology shifts out the supply curve, and all of a sudden in the market, the suppliers don't want to lower prices right away, because they'd like to keep prices high forever. Madison Park. But when they find that goes on, they find out that actually, here's the surplus here. So there's a surplus of oil in the marketplace. And in fact, the way they see that, and we'll come back to this again and again, is they see it because their inventories start building. The market's no longer clear. The stuff's not being shipped out of New Jersey and Louisiana as fast as it used to be shipped out. And those tanks are starting to fill up. And in order to get rid of the stuff that's in those tanks and is coming in every day, what do they have to start doing?
Lowering the price.
Again? What are producers going to have to do if they see their inventories building up and they want to get rid of this stuff?
Produce less.
They could produce less, but they don't quite have an incentive to do that yet. But what else do they do?
Lower prices.
They're lowering prices, so they're doing these simultaneously. So they start to lower their prices. And as they lower their prices, what happens on the demand side? There's not a shift in demand now, but there's a movement down this demand curve. And this surplus, the difference between supply and demand, is getting smaller. And again, firms have to do it again, and they keep doing this until they get new market clearing. So let's say by July, they end up with this new market price. They're producing more oil. They've got more oil. They're able to produce more and put it out of the ground. But in order to get rid of it, they have to lower the price. Consumers are happy. They're sort of happy too because it's cheap oil. But the price is falling. They're not getting as much as they got before. So that's the first thing we see happening in this oil market, is this technological change that takes place. Now, at the same time, what's happening to China's economy over the last 6 months or 8 months? Anybody know? It's shrinking, and it's actually going down. Yeah, it's been rattling along at an 8 or 9% growth rate for about 3 or 4 years, and it's finally starting to hit the skids. There's just too much going on. China has all sorts of internal problems we don't hear about, and some of them are starting to pay off or pay the wrong way. What's going to happen to demand for oil in the world if China's economy starts to slow down? Demand's going to shift in. So what we've had is we've had a major producer or a major consumer of oil start to demand less because their production's slowing down and their growth rate's going on down. What happens in the marketplace if demand by China starts to decrease? Well, we had reached this equilibrium before, and this is the second point we ended up with, and this was the second price we ended up with. But now we have this decrease in demand. Again, we have this, China's all of a sudden not bringing as much oil in. What happens then? Well, the same sort of phenomenon occurs. We now have another surplus. And really the surplus is from here to here. And that's going to do the same thing that the change in supply did earlier. It's going to force the market to start changing prices. So the suppliers are going to, again, what they're going to see is they're going to go, they're at a particular price, and their inventories are starting to build again. So as they see their inventory start to build, they realize we need to decrease the price some more. So they start decreasing the price. There's movement along the demand curve. They end up with a new equilibrium. So the fear that's going on, and the reason you might sort of casually have heard that the stock market's been bouncing all over the place for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And the reason is this sort of decrease in demand that we're observing with the Chinese appears to be happening in Europe too. There's a slowdown. This means it slows down to a certain point, but all of a sudden production's starting to decrease, and people are looking at world markets and saying, well, there may be a general slowdown here. And if there's a general slowdown, you're going to have more decrease in demand from the European market for gasoline and oil. And then on top of that, with the exception of the last 10 days on the East Coast, we've had one of the mildest winters in the last 20 years. And winter time is one of the big selling times for oil. It's heating oil. There's less refining that has to go on, less other things that have to go on in terms of getting that to the marketplace. So we've also had a decrease in demand, cause for decreases in demand for heating oil. All of these things are putting, and again, each time one of these occurs, and keep in mind they're all happening all the time simultaneously, but as they're happening, there's this downward pressure on oil and gasoline prices. So the market's adjusting to all these things. It's affecting all sorts of other markets too. So what's happening over in the natural gas market is demand is just going down all the time because people can switch over and go buy oil products. In the 70s, what we saw when we had this huge increase in the price of oil, everybody, not everybody, but 3/4 of homes in the United States were heated with heating oil. And their stoves used electric stoves. And what we saw happening over time, once oil prices started rising in the 70s, is that houses started to switch over to using natural gas for heat and natural gas for cooking. It's a huge switch caused simply by the price of oil, but it was a slow process. It happened over 20 or 30 years because people already had oil heaters in their homes, they already had electric stoves, but they were substituting over time. And in fact, the gas companies, Washington Natural Gas, put in programs, actually I think one of them is still in place, where they would subsidize you switching to natural gas. There were incentives, obviously incentives for them because they wanted to sell natural gas, but the city was also trying to cut down on use of oil, which burns more carbon at the time. So what we're seeing in this oil market is all these sets of events. Every one of them is putting downward pressure on the price of oil. There was some thought about 2 weeks ago that the Saudis were just on their own going to say, well, we're going to cut back on production of oil, we're going to pull oil out, and that'll force the price up. But they don't want to do that because by having a low price, they're putting pressure on the American and Canadian oil producers, and they're trying to slow down their output. So in fact, the Saudis have actually increased production of oil in the last couple of months, just again trying to put world pressure on these prices. And we've been through all this before. We've seen these big up and down swings in oil markets. So very interesting market to watch. I don't think we're going to see $30 oil. But we could see it dip under 40 a few times. There's going to be some, what we're seeing right now is, I wouldn't say it's chaos, but we're seeing some sort of confusion in the marketplace. No one knows exactly where the price is going to end up or what inventories will end up being. And you do get some difficulty. When you start getting low enough prices and there's enough oil out there, I mean, we can increase our driving, but we can only increase our driving so much. And compared to the 1970s, if you change gasoline prices a lot, while people, if we're driving 4 miles to the gallon, having the price of gasoline change by a factor of 3 has a big impact. But at 30 miles to the gallon or 40 miles to the gallon, this is what a lot of cars get now, these price changes don't have as big an impact on your behavior. And that's another thing that's sort of changing these oil markets internationally and changing the use of gasoline. Okay, anything else on oil? Enough on that. Why don't we take a break now and we'll come back and we will go through the progress of the market chapter.
学费收不收？你扣啊！我不能赚。
I can't do 2 quarters in a row.
Here, you can draw the drawings.
All of them?
You know, I'll tell you about this. Okay, we'll erase the piece and get a demand and supply curve. We'll just make you do a couple problems.
Oh, boy.
Okay, so we need a demand and a supply curve. Yeah, draw the demand and supply curve, just get an equilibrium price so we have a starting point. There's the supply curve, there's the demand curve, and you have an equilibrium price for the across. And equilibrium quantity, there we go. Okay, so we'll do this all in one graph. Okay, a cold snap hits Florida, and the price of orange juice rises in supermarkets throughout the country. So what's going on? Anybody? You have cold snap, probably 2 things are going on. Here's what's going on.
Supply curve is shifting.
Supply curve shifting in, right? And that's driving the price up. What else could be happening?
Price goes up.
The price is going up, so that's going to happen with the change in the, you can see the increase in the price. What else?
The demand for orange juice may go up because of the cold.
It could go up because of expectations. People are expecting the price to go up, so they're gonna stop. So you could have an increase in demand there. So you might actually have that price increasing partly because, one, because of the supply curve, that's the first phenomenon. And the next, what happens if the demand curve shifts up? Yeah, right side. Then you get a bigger price increase. And what you're experiencing there. Yeah, that was the second point. Okay, second point. Okay, do another, erase that one and do another one. So the weather turns warm in New England every summer, and the price of hotel rooms and Caribbean resorts plummets. What's happening?
Demand for hotel rooms.
Pardon me?
Demand for hotel rooms. is down.
The demand for hotel rooms is just decreasing. So you're just seeing a shift in of the demand curve, and you end up with a new price. You go from price 1 to price 2. Okay, and war breaks out in the Middle East, the price of gasoline rises, and the price of the used Cadillac falls. What's happening? So do a new one with Cadillacs. So what is gasoline and Cadillacs? They're complements. So if the price of a complement would happen here, what's the price? What is war breaking out in the Middle East going to do to the price of gasoline? And drive it up. So supply goes in. What happens to the price of? What's the price of oil going up? What's happening to the price of Cadillacs? So if you have a market out here for Cadillacs, what's it look like? Yeah.
The demand is going down because oil prices are going up.
So the demand for Cadillacs is actually going to be going down. This is a Cadillac curve, not an oil curve. Okay, you've gone through your purgatory for today. Thank you. Okay, I'll do the next steps. So that was the other thing I did not throw in to the oil equation that you should just be aware of. I think I'm going to send you a bunch of articles on oil markets. I think this is one of them. The sanctions against Iran and Russia are starting to take a bigger toll because of the Russian sanctions. So that's also decreasing supply in the oil markets. So that's another impact we didn't include in the earlier diagrams when we were talking about what was happening in the oil markets. But, especially the Russian situation. They're having big problems. They're having big problems because of low prices, but they're also decreasing the amount of shipments that's going on, that are going on. Okay, 2, an increase in the demand for notebooks raises the quantity of notebooks demanded, but not the quantity supplied. Is this statement true or false? So you have an increase. We're starting with some equilibrium quantity and some equilibrium price. And let's say an increase in demand for notebooks. So an increase in demand for notebooks in a market where nothing else is going on is going to increase the price and increase the quantity. But keep in mind, people will go ahead and, you need to think about that, because if you're not thinking as an economist, you're saying to yourself, oh, the price went up and the quantity, demand went up and the quantity went up that people bought. That violates the law of demand. That doesn't violate the law of demand. The law of demand says that this curve is downward. Both these curves are downward sloping. In the scenario we're describing here, this demand curve is shifting. So that's how you end up with a higher price and a higher quantity when the market curves again. That's probably the most common mistake made in the media, is confusing shifts in demand curves with movement along demand curves. You have to be careful with that. Markets for minivans. So there's demand, there's supply of minivans. People decide to have more kids. What happens? Demand's going to shift out. Firms starts Ford and Chevy and Chrysler start seeing minivans leaving their lots faster. They raise their prices a bit, they don't negotiate as much, and they start producing more of them, which is what you see in this phenomenon. A strike by steel workers raised the steel prices. What is steel to a minivan? Price of input, right? So the supply is going to do what? It's going to shift back. Prices are going to rise. Quantity sold in the marketplace is going to go down. Does anybody have it in the video? I don't want to say terrible things about minivans. Yeah, I'll skip that. Okay. Engineers develop new automated machinery for the production of minivans. Change in technology, supply curve shifts out. There's downward pressure on prices, and we have more minivans in the marketplace. The design invention of the minivan, which was different from the VW camper and van, occurred probably about 1980. A guy named Lee Iacocca was running Chrysler, and they were looking for some change in a marketplace, that they could come up with something that someone would sell, and somebody came up with a minivan. It saved Chrysler, and it became the vehicle for 10 years in terms of profitability for them. Of course, since then, everybody and their brothers copied them. But at least initially, the creation of the minivan was a huge success for American. It's probably the first success in the American automobile industry after the oil embargoes of the 70s and the collapse of the car industry. It was the first time something ever actually came to the market that they were really successful with. The price of sports utility vehicles rises. What's a sports utility vehicle to a minivan? They're substitutes. So people are going to substitute away from sports utility vehicles towards minivans. So this demand curve is going to shift out. Equilibrium price is going to go up, quantity is going to go up. The stock market crash lowers people's wealth. We'll assume that's an income effect. What do you think happens to the demand for these things? Demand's going to shift in. Of course, it's affecting lots of other things. It's shifting. So the price and quantity are both going to go down. So it occurs. Okay, let's go through these a little faster. Consider the market for DVDs, TV screens, and tickets at movie theaters. This TV screen starts. So the technology in this particular marketplace is changing so fast that we're not even thinking of the various options for downloads that we can have now. So we have another option here. This TV screens is partly. Okay, DVDs and TV screens are what?
Compliments.
Probably compliments. DVDs and movie tickets. Substitutes. What we're going to see next time are by the beginning of next week, is we're going to see that some things are stronger substitutes than other things. So you can have things that are really close substitutes and things that are not so close but still substitutes. But oil and sweaters are substitutes for each other. Heating oil and sweaters. You know, in fact, our dearest president, Jimmy Carter, got on national television when the oil embargo was on and got out a big sweater and put it on and just said, "Put your sweaters on. You know, turn your thermostats down and put your sweaters on." So he was talking about substitutes. Some are closer than others. Suppose a technological advance reduces the cost of manufacturing TV screens. What happens to the market to TV screens? There's the demand, there's the supply. What's the change in technology do? Shift that supply curve out and lowers the price of televisions. And he doesn't go into this at all, but if you look at televisions, they're probably, I mean, you can look over 5 years, and the change in technology and the change in prices is absolutely astounding. I'm embarrassed to admit, every television I bought in the last 25 years I purchased the week before the World Series. At some point or another, and this year I have a 100-inch diagonal television screen, and it costs $579 on sale at Best Buy. And the photograph, the quality of the thing is like looking at National Geographic photographs. It's just absolutely beautiful. So, now I watch football too. But 2 years ago, that thing would have cost $2,800. And as a matter of fact, this is a little more embarrassing. I moved out of the house 2 years ago. And my last dip into the television market was for 2 monstrous televisions to again watch the playoffs and the World Series on. But it's probably 6 or 7 years ago that I bought those. And they weren't flat screens, but they were big. They were like 43 inch or something. I've tried to give them away, and people wouldn't take them. Suckers did. They must have weighed 220 pounds apiece. They were just monsters. But all of a sudden, I paid some ridiculous amount of money for them. But in 4 or 5 years' time, they were absolutely worthless. And what you're seeing there is this huge change in technology. And because these things aren't really, a lot of it's not patentable and it's easy technology to adopt, and they're all doing the same thing, these prices fall really fast. What's the latest one? There's a curved screen that has some new electronic technology, and it's not clear to me that our eyes, at least my eyes, are going to be able to see the difference. You can put photographs on these 100-inch screens and they look like photographs now. So I'm not sure they're going to have quantum leaps, although we say that about everything, right? So who knows? But fascinating thing. But what you're seeing here is changes in technology just driving those prices down constantly. Over the past 30 years, technological advances have reduced the cost of computer chips. How do you think this has affected the market for computers and for computer software and for typewriters? Well, what's it done to computers? Completely changed how we define computers, and I think this is just reflecting somebody not writing it, but these changes in technology have made computers tools that are able to do all sorts of things that they couldn't do 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. So I'm including in computers your iPhones and your Samsung Androids, with again so much computing power. The technologies have just changed drastically, which is why everybody has one. So I'm trying to think of when this was. This was 1990. I was working on the trial for the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and we were given 7 gigabytes of data to do analysis on. I was given fisheries data for the state of Alaska, very detailed daily catch data for the state of Alaska. And stuff needed to be computed fast, so I went to Western Digital. Now, first I called up HP, and I bought a computer. The speed was 25 megahertz. I didn't buy a hard drive, just had a standard, it had a 20 meg hard drive or something. But it cost $19,000. HP made 3 of them. I got to get one. So that was number one. That was a desktop computer. So then I went to Western Digital, which was the hard disk manufacturing company. And I said, I'm using a software package and I can't use Microsoft. I need to get a large amount of data that I can sort. And they said, well, the largest thing we have is 10 gigabytes. And I said, okay, I'll take it. I still have it. I have it in storage. It's this long and that wide and this high. And it also cost $19,000. And this was 30 years ago. So you can see what's happened. I mean, the technological change that's occurred is phenomenal. I can now do, literally, I do the same sorts of calculations on a 5-year-old computer that I picked up at Seattle laptops for $229. Because it's faster, it's more reliable, doesn't take as much space, all sorts of stuff. That's another one of these huge technological changes where you see the supply curves are driving that. But the supply curves are going down because the costs are going down. But keep in mind what's happening to demand on all those things. Demand is also changing because what you can do with these things is changing. So what we're seeing in the marketplace, especially for electronic devices, is demand is being created for goods and services that people never imagined. You're all used to carrying around a cell phone, but I'm trying to think. I would say in the late 80s is when cell phones first started coming out. And if you've ever seen the old World War II movies, they have the radios that have a handpiece that's about that wide, about that long, about that thick, and has an antenna stuck on it that sticks up. I still have that too. That costs like $900. I'm pretty sure you had to be in sight of the person. But, I mean, that's another technology. And now, of course, everything that Apple has done has happened really in the last 15 years. So huge technological change, driving industry, but also driving how you live your lives. It's a cool telephone, that's why I keep it. It just looks cool. Let's see. Using supply and demand diagrams show the effect of the following events on the market for sweatshirts. A hurricane in South Carolina damages the cotton crop. Well, of course, cotton is the input into producing sweatshirts, so the supply curve would shift in. Price of cotton clothing would go up. Incidentally, you would see the same thing if we said all of a sudden, what would happen to the price of cotton if I told, or the price of sweatshirts if all of a sudden I told you that we were going to ban imports of cotton products from Indonesia. The price of sweatshirts would go up the exact same way as having a crop failure. So different things are going to cause these prices and different changes in the marketplace. Price of leather jackets falls. I'm not so sure that cotton sweatshirts and leather jackets are that close a substitute, but as much as they're substitutes, people will switch away from cotton sweatshirts towards the leather. So, all colleges require morning exercise and appropriate attire, so what's going to happen to the demand for cotton products? It's going to go up. Price and quantity are going to go up. And new knitting machines are invented. Supply curve is going to shift out. Price is going to fall. Quantities, demand, that's equilibrium quantity is going to increase. If at some point you want to scream at me and tell me to draw one of these, but I'm assuming you're starting to get the drawing part. So shake your hand if you want to see. The market for pizza has the following demand and supply schedules, graph the demand and supply curve. So you can see by looking at equilibriums at 81 and 60. So that's what that'll turn out. So if the actual price in this market were above the equilibrium price, what would drive the market towards the equilibrium? Let's say the price is up here. What's going to happen? This is the stuff you have to think about. This is the market dynamic.
Would supplying more?
Well, if the price is up here, they're already supplying out here, right? So they're already supplying more. Right? So what's going to happen in the marketplace? Keep going. So that's how much is being demanded, right?
Yeah,
This is how much is being supplied. What's this?
surplus.
That's the surplus. How are they going to get rid of the surplus?
And drop the price.
They're going to drop the
But-
price. You got it? You sort of see it?
Just the question is zero.
Okay. So what you're going to see, I mean, the way they phrase it is the price is above equilibrium, so that's why I have 9 up there. But you're going to have downward pressure both on the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded, of course, is going to go up as the price falls. So you're going to end up sooner or later at this equilibrium. Pizza's another weird market. I mean, somebody advertises pizza on television or on the radio for like $5 and Domino's or something. It's hard to imagine how to supply pizzas for $5 a piece. And then, of course, if you go to and get it from Big Mario's, which is actually great pizza if you don't know what that is, it's anchovies and sausage. And that's anchovies and sausage from Mario's is like $26 or something. But it's a different product. And you've got the competition in that industry is driving these prices all over the place. And of course, the guys on television are trying to get quantity out of it. Okay, scientists reveal that eating oranges decreases the risk of diabetes, and at the same time, farmers use a new fertilizer that makes orange trees produce more oranges. What's happening in the marketplace? So we're starting off with equilibrium. An equilibrium price and quantity in the orange market.
We shift the supply curve out because we're able to supply more oranges.
And there's the fertilizer effect. And what's the other effect?
And then the demand curve goes out as well because more people, it cures diabetes or helps with
The
diabetes.
demand curve goes where?
To the right.
That way. So what you end up with is some indeterminate change in price because you don't know how much to make. So this is actually a good thing to look at here. Look up. So you have two effects going on. You have an increase in supply because the supply curve went out. That by itself has what effect on price? It causes a decrease in price, and what does it do in terms of quantity of the marketplace? It increases the quantity, right? So that's actually pushing it towards this point. Okay? But the demand side effect is what?
More people.
It's going to cause an increase in demand, so that's going to cause, and in this particular situation, it means it's shifting out. So it's conceivable that if we say that increase in demand was immense, that could overwhelm the supply effect. You could end up with a demand curve out here. If that were the case, what would happen to price compared to the original spot?
Right.
It would be higher. So when you have two things going on, both of them causing some sort of outward effect, increases in quantities, one of them may be larger than the other one. So you can conceivably have increases in prices. And at the same time, you can have another situation with the same set of facts, but not as big an effect, where you have a decrease from the equilibrium. You have to look at the comparison between the two of them. It's not always a clear picture. So, is anybody going to the football game on Sunday? Does your family have season tickets? That's lucky. Does anybody know what the StubHub price hit this morning? Was it $4.99? $4.99 was the low price for a ticket this morning to next Sunday's game. But if you want to go by yourself, you can wait until Sunday morning, and you'll probably get a great seat cheap. When I taught it in New York City for 4 years when my kids were in school there, and I taught it in my youth school affairs, and I had the rest of the time free, and I always taught spring semester so I could go to baseball games. And I would wait until 2 hours before the game, and I only needed one seat. So I got these great seats in Yankee Stadium all the time for $25, $30, I mean, so I suspect what's going to happen here is that come Sunday morning, if you want to go by yourself, the price of that ticket is going to plummet because no one's, everybody's trying to go with somebody and they don't want to go alone. So that's a good way to do it. We went to, my daughter and I were sitting watching the second Kansas City Giants game. And we turned to each other and said, why don't we just go? So we went down to San Francisco to a World Series game and paid an exorbitant amount for the tickets. And there were guys out front hawking tickets as we were walking in. Good tickets, like $50. And we paid way more than that. But that waiting part has an impact on the demand and supply of these things. You should look up on StubHub, but I think this is what I looked up for. World Series, or not World Series, Super Bowl tickets. I think the lowest Super Bowl ticket right now on StubHub is something like $1,200. It's some ridiculous amount. And some of them are $7,000. And just incredible prices to go to a Super Bowl. And I look at it with my 100-inch television screen and go, hey, I just saved an extra $100. That's not so bad. Okay, do you have any questions on any of these? The reason I've spent extra time on this particular stuff is these market movements are what we see all the time. And when we start analyzing public interference in the marketplace or business decisions, we're going to be shifting these curves around like this. You need to get comfortable doing it. I think most of you are semi-comfortable with it, but you need to just be able to slap these things down and start drawing. Okay, I will see you on Wednesday.